Milita sils. Katamo omo tel public hearing. Dia public hearing ra Senate sel committee ra Senate Public Utilities Communications and Housing Development. Yang hearing lo banggela BSCC Belao Submarine Cable Corporation. El selonti la BSCC el ngar sel Senate resolution Senate Joint Resolution 10-68. Itiral House Joint Resolution number 10-73-16. House of Delegates samle pasartel House CC will resolution. Ngi authorize ra President el mo otabdi sila tulasing sovereign guarantee. Sovereign guarantee ra blur belaw. Almo support ralo na lola ngi belaw submarine cable corporation. Alngi 8.2 million ra Australia, ma 4 million from Japan Bank of International Cooperation, ma additional 4 million from Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation. Kada mga sulela ikal government ra Australia ma valura siya pal nga seor gider te gidel ulul dal suela BSCC il momlara ongerul cable ma era to mo ring di iso hallo islo seya por dra BSCC ngatya man nga sulil mo sa ilmere lalita sils ar senator sa ngatya nga senator Agitaya senator Utu Sangbaw Senior Senator Mason Evangal Whips, Senator Dr. Stevenson Cuarte, Senator Frank Yota, ma Florida Senator Tangak Senator Cray Mariur. Kamamam no sab aman miril alsis Mr. Sakuma, Chairman ng BSCC, gukmo conductor tel hearing algirel tel gangira sovereign guarantee mora bilaw Submarine Cable Corporation. Malbel ka mga kami metal hearing marong mo maskawa te alam mo huka mutiking yu open ra hearing te public hearing mang sumang ngani ngidil atal me ngani karile ing polsep ela PSCC din kalong nga ital ke komsulang please opening statement ra PSCC.
Test. Kamal Musulang, Chairman. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to come and present our case. And I think we've come a long way since the last hearing that we had with you in June. But I'd just like to read this quick opening statement, and then we'll go through our presentation for today, which would outline several points on justifying the sovereign guarantee for the Palau Cable 2. In our previous hearing, we presented the case for the importance of a second cable, and we can discuss that further in this hearing. But I'd first like to reassure the committee that the BSCC board, its staff, and everyone involved in this project recognizes the uncertain times we're living in, and we can appreciate the importance of the decision that the committee has made at this time. We do recognize the consequence of the decision to proceed with procuring a second cable, and we're confident that you'll weigh the benefits and the costs of moving forward with this project. That being said, we've come to the point where a decision does need to be made on whether to proceed with this PC2 project. What we as the board of BSCC hope to answer with our presentation and discussion today are two questions. Why now? And why should we proceed with the full PC2 project? And to answer these questions, I think it would help to go back to our last hearing in June, where you as a committee tasked us with the following three tasks. So the first task that you assigned to BSCC as a board was to work collaboratively with PNCC and the Bureau of Communications. And there are several instances that we can site here that can attest to that. So since then, we've scheduled and arranged a Telecommunication Association of Palau meeting with PNCC, Palau Telecoms, Palau Mobile, Bureau of Communications, all to present our plans of the PC2 project and how that fits into the overall strengthening of Palau's telecommunication sector. We've also arranged separate meetings with our board, the BSCC board, and the PNCC board as well, to make sure that there's alignment between BSCC and PNCC, and I'm sure they presented that to you in their meeting earlier. We've also made arrangements to come up with payment plans for our service providers, because we know in these difficult economic times there needs to be concessions and leniencies in meeting the obligations of the RSPs, the retail service providers that ultimately do provide the connection to our customers or to our citizens. And since then, we've also lit up the fiber network or the fiber cable from the CAP-N, the cable access point Ngaramlungui, to IRI, and PNCC has taken advantage of that, as well as the other RSPs, and they've now connected directly to the cable landing station for PC1 in Ngaramlungui. The second task that the committee had assigned to BSCC was to take another look at the financing strategy for the second cable. And this was actually very good and beneficial because what we have been able to do in renegotiating the financing was to reduce the original debt from 25 million to 16 million and reduce BSCC's cash contribution from 5 million to 1 million, and we can go more into detail on that later in the presentation. We've also done an analysis that shows that the project itself can withstand 60% COVID revenue impact, which is pretty safe, because right now I think they're estimating a 20% reduction in economic downturn. And then the third task that the committee assigned to the board was to establish the benefits of a regional hub. So one of the ideas of having PC2 connect to Palau was that then we would become a fully redundant regional hub of high-speed connectivity. And there have been studies done since then to show the predicted value of becoming a hub, and that would, estimate or to anticipate industries like data centers and other tech industries possibly being established here. And right now the net present value of that estimation is $47 million. I'll let our CEO kind of go into that detail, but if you can go on to the next slide, Raman. Our goal at BSCC, our mission, has always been to provide high-quality, low-cost international connectivity for Palau's retail service providers. And we've always had a strategy to do that, and the strategy is a four-part strategy. The first part was completed on December 2017, which was PC1. So this graphic shows, a straight connection to the outside world via fiber optic cable. The issues with only stopping at strategy 1 are we're still, although we've significantly increased our network connectivity, we're still limited to 10 gigabits. And then also the access to the retail service providers is not equitable. And so that means that PNCC had direct access to the cable landing station in Ngaramlungui, but not the other retail service providers. And in BSCC's mandate, we're required by law to provide equitable service to all the service providers. And then the third issue was that there is a single point of failure. This might be the biggest issue. The single point of failure is that if, hopefully not, but if a earthquake or a ship should break that single point of connectivity coming into Palau, that cable, then we would be without connectivity for an indefinite amount of time until the repair ship could come and repair it. And we've seen that happen in the Marshall Islands and in Saipan, and then basically it just puts a whole shutdown to the entire country. And we went over that in the last hearing, so I won't go too much into detail on that. So the second phase or second stage of the strategy is to provide equitable access to the fiber optic cable. And to do that, we installed the fiber optic cable trenched from the Ngaramlungui cable landing station to an access point in Irai. And this allows all RSPs to access the full connectivity and access the full benefits. So at this point, all of the RSPs are now connected to the cable access point in Irai, and that has a direct connection to the cable access point in Ngaramlungui and directly out to the world. This still left the issue of a single point of failure, and we're still vulnerable to breaks in the cable. So the stage 3 in our strategy. Oh, questions?
Senator Ngirebang.
Sula Chair, based on that slide, I'm just reading the first line. Access limited to 10 Gbps. And is that limitation on PNCC? They can only uptake 10 gigabits per second. And
Well,
why is that?
I'll let you answer that in a second, but the connection from Cap N, Ngaramlungui, to PNCC's main office was originally through a little bit of an outdated cable, and the capacity of that cable was 10 gigabits, but I think there was only actually one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, the access at Ngaramlungui, high-speed access, is via the PNCC Festoon network, which is somewhat dated from 1995, somewhat deteriorated, and it's estimated the throughput limit on that Festoon network is 10 gigabits per second. So that was an absolute limit, and we're already more than halfway there. Yeah.
So if I could just follow up, we just had a meeting with PNCC prior to this, and we were told that this cable that's going to IRI served no benefit to PNCC because they could take it at Ngaramlungui just fine. So that's why that caught my attention.
That is true in the sense that if there was no more capacity growth, yes, that's correct. But once they go beyond 10 gigabits per second, then it's no longer possible. So yes, it's true that we don't need that today, but next year or the year after, definitely we will need it, yes. No limit. So we've got 48 fibre on that route. Each fibre pair could, in theory, carry 100 gigs. So we've dedicated 12 fibre pairs for BSCC use, and the other 12 fibre pairs are available for whatever use the service providers want to make. We've given them 3 fibre pairs apiece that they can use for distribution around Babeldown. But on our express route, we've still got 12 fibre pairs which could run 100 gigs each. So more than the capacity of, in fact, the cable that we've got or the IRU that we've got.
Okay, thank you, Russell. You have any more questions, Senator Ngirebang? Okay, thank you. You can continue, Chairman Kayo Sakuma.
Yeah, our treasurer also just wanted us to note that there are also limitations on the other two RSPs, and they don't have direct access or infrastructure from Ngurumalangui, the access point to IRI. So that was a big benefit to them as well. Stage 3 of our strategy was to, or is to, create a Circle Island network, which would increase our redundancy and reduce our potential failure points by completing a cable around the entire compact road. And this was originally allocated to the original ADB financing that we had procured in the first cable. I think it's important to note that not only does this provide redundancy in the network, but it also provides multiple access points on that route where states or projects can directly access the fiber cable. And I think if you've drove around the island, you'll see these little access points that are coming out of the road on the Kyuklu side right now, and eventually it'll be throughout the whole route. And we have worked with governors as well as PNCC to decide where those will best be placed. All of that, however, doesn't eliminate that single point of failure, which still exists from Cap N, Ngurumalangui, out to the main cable. And so stage 4 is meant to make a fully redundant network in Palau with no single access points. And by in order to do this, we would need to proceed with the PC2 project, and you can see that on the top. So this is the final stage in the strategy, and that final stage is to deploy the PC2 and have the branching unit and spur connect directly to a access point in Ngartmao, and that access point would then connect to the Circle Island network, which would create a fully redundant and failure-safe system. So any break on that network would be able to be rerouted to a different connection point, and it would eliminate any interruptions in Palau's telecommunications. So, oh yeah.
Can you go back to the last slide? Can I ask a question? Why are you not having another cable to Koror?
Though that infrastructure exists
I see. Okay.
for all the RSPs at this point. There was an original plan before to have the cable routed all the way to the old president's office, I believe. Yeah, Munes. But I think all the RSPs have that infrastructure that goes all the way to the beginning of IRI, and so right now there was no need. They can connect directly into that.
Okay, thank you. You can move forward.
So this graph here basically shows BSCC's capacity growth from October 17, where we went live, the go live date, to October 2020. The red line and is that gray? The gray line are, I think, the most important lines here. This shows the difference between the current usage, and the gray line is the satellite backup that is existing right now. So there's always been a satellite backup, and PNCC probably talked about that earlier, just in case there was a break in connection. But as you can see, PNCC has reduced that capacity for their satellite backup significantly to a point where right now the usage at 5,000 or 5 gigabits, right? 5 gigabits would basically outweigh the backup capacity. There would be no way Palau would be able to function on a satellite backup in terms of even just batch transactions being sent in and out. So the economy would pretty much shut down. Back in October 7, 2017, you can see that they were basically about the same, and an interruption on the cable, you wouldn't really see a difference, but now it basically would just shut down the entire country. I think this alone is probably a justification to have PC2 go forward, but so with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Robin to go over the project history, unless there's any questions before we proceed with the presentation.
Any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think before we go on, I just wanted to kind of reiterate that the whole purpose and basis of what we wanted to kind of convey today is to answer those two questions is why now, and why do we want to go after the whole thing, especially in these uncertain economic times. And I think Robin can go into this a little bit more into detail, but I think we had spoken earlier about the possibility of just procuring a branching unit and saving the larger project until later. I think things have changed since then, and Robin can discuss that further. There's also going to be extra cost and delay in introducing new financing if we move away from the financing opportunities that we've secured now with Australia and Japan and other grants. And also the renegotiation of the space on the cable with TPN, the provider of the fiber, is very time sensitive right now. But of course we know in the end this is a hard decision to make, so we appreciate the opportunity for us to come and state our case.
Thank you, KB. The point of showing the project history is really just to show that there's been a fair amount of preparation and lead-up time expended already to get to the point that we're at, and just explain the history a little bit. So back in September 2018, the BSCC board first started to move away from a satellite backup strategy. So BSCC has always had a backup strategy on the basis that our feeling was that if BSCC broke, irrespective of our legal responsibilities, everyone in Palau will ask us what happened, how do you fix it? And it's our responsibility. So we had to have a backup strategy. Our original backup strategy back in September 2018 was satellite based, but at that point our capacity growth was so high that we recognised that a satellite backup would not be adequate to the task, and that in fact as time went by it would be increasingly inadequate. So it was at that point that we were in fact Giovanna came with myself and Richard to Singapore, and we looked around at a cable conference to see if we could identify any prospects. The best solution for island communities is always a branching unit approach. If we were to build our own cable all the way to Guam, for example, the cost would probably be treble what we're looking at here. So a branching unit solution is good because it minimises the cost, so we need a passing cable to get an economic solution. At that September conference in Singapore, we identified 3 prospects that all claimed they were in the conceptual design phase and were going to pass by Palau. So our first thing was to monitor those 3 prospects and identify which of them was the horse to back. And by around February of 2019, we'd already identified that Echo was the most likely to succeed, and as it turned out, that judgment was correct. The other 2 projects have fallen behind. By March 2019, we developed a BSCC only strategy. That is, just on BSCC's own resources, could we do something? And the answer was yes. We came up with a branching unit strategy. We could put a branching unit on this ECHO cable within the resource capability of BSCC if we borrowed $2 million from the National Development Bank of Palau. So that was our first strategy back in March 2019, BU only, borrow $2 million from the Development Bank and put in probably $2 to $3 million of BSCC funds, and we could put in a branching unit. So that was our holding or placeholder strategy, if you like, get into the game. After that, we were looking around for financing, and we identified JBIC in about May of 2019, and over time built up a package that ended up in about February, March of 2020 with a full financing package for a $30 million project. And then COVID struck and we suspended the project. And at that point, the Australian government stepped in, and AIFFP made us the offer that we put to the committee last June, which was the one for a branching unit only. So we'd gone branching unit only BSCC to full project financed by Australian and Japanese debt to BU only, partly financed by Australian debt and partly by grants from Australia. So at that point, BSCC contribution would have been $900,000 BSCC cash, $850,000 grant from the Australians, and $1.75 million debt. You'll recall that was the deal we were talking about in June. That was an okay deal, but it was still a placeholder deal because it meant that at some future point, and not too far into the future, we would have to assemble the full project and connect. And it would cost a lot more to do it in the future. The reason for that is that instead of going along with the ECHO project, which is mobilise ships and resources to build this cable, we would be doing it as a standalone project, which means we'd be mobilising a cable ship just for our little project. And the cost of mobilising and demobilising a cable ship is $3 million. So there's $3 million of extra cost no matter what by using a BU first and then come back and do the full system. But that was okay, we felt, as a holding position to minimise our cash exposures in the time of COVID. However, thanks Nancy, at that point the USA started to step into the picture, and it was obvious at that point that the USA had interests in Palau, in connecting Palau, and with the USA intervention then the Japanese came back into the game, and it became part of this tripartite infrastructure deal that the Japanese, Australian and US governments have got going in the Pacific, sometimes called Blue Dot strategy, which is to build up infrastructure in Pacific Island nations. And by October 2020 we had a full PC2 financing package, which is the one that we've sent to the committee already, the one that consists of that $8 million of debt from the Japanese, $4 million from SMBC, $4 million from the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, and then the other maximum $8 and a bit million from the Australians. The rest, the balance, is grants from the Australian government and from the US, including a controversial, I should say, element, which is $7 million from the compact funds, which you might say is giving us the same money twice, but I guess that'd be a cynical perspective. In any case, by October 2020 we had the full financing package assembled, and now in November 2020, if we're going to go ahead with this, now is the time. It's time for us to actually start executing contracts. So up to now we've been negotiating contracts, reviewing contracts, etc., etc. Come December, it'll be time for the board to be authorising signing contracts, and once that happens, of course, we're committing funds. So this is really the key decision point that we've reached. I've put it as now is the time for us to decide whether we want to fish or to cut bait. So that's where we've brought ourselves to at this point. We did anticipate some questions from the committee, and maybe it'd be worth dealing with those too. So, so the first point is the one that the chairman referred to. Why don't we just do the BU? and keep our money in the bank, and we'll go ahead and do the full cable project a bit later on when we've got a more certain economic background. And it's a very good question. Of course, it's probably the pivotal question. And I've already alluded to part of the answer. $3 million extra to mobilise a cable ship and demobilise it. There'd be other mobilisation costs as well. We'd have to mobilise a project team again and so forth that are relatively minor costs. But the big one, big ticket item, is the $3 million cable ship remobilisation. So there's 10% increase in cost. And the other thing is that we are currently negotiating a potential fibre pair sale. So that's like an infrastructure cost sharing approach. The background to this is that there's believed to be a US Department of Defence fibre pair on the Echo cable. And logically, you would think the US Department of Defence would be interested in connecting that fibre pair to Palau. But under our original design, they could not, because we only had two fibre pair design, which enabled Palau traffic to go either west to Singapore or east to the US. So one fibre pair goes that way, one fibre pair goes that way, which left no room for any Department of Defence fibre pair. So we've changed the design to a 4 fibre pair design, which enables us to make an infrastructure sale to the US Department of Defence, probably through TPN, Trans-Pacific Networks. So we wouldn't deal directly with the US Defence Department, we'd sell it through TPN. But that deal does look extremely possible, and that's worth another $3 million. So the risk is, if we just do the BU, of course, then part of that for sure would not be available, which is the $1.75 million BU contribution. That wouldn't be there, and possibly the rest as well. So there might be another $3 million of additional cost. So that's $6 million, or now 20% of additional cost for the project if we defer it. Of course, there's the financing risk, which we're not really able to quantify, but one would assume that it is going to be very challenging to put together a financing package in the future that's as good as this one we see before us today. There's the additional cost that I mentioned to mobilise a project team, which might be maybe $500,000 or thereabouts. And we would also need to renegotiate the contract with TPN to enable us to get the maximum flexibility for when we actually constructed the future branch to Palau. At the moment, the contract says we have to connect to that BU within 3 years. Now, I think 3 years is probably unrealistic, because really that would only give us a 12-month gain because of the 2-year project time. So we need to extend that out to maybe 5 years, or even better, 10 years. I doubt if they'd give us 10, but they might give us 5. So there'd be a renegotiation of the TPN contract, which itself holds some risks. Not great risk, but some risk. So we think that while we could do the BU-only solution still, that it is a suboptimal solution from the point of view of Palau, that we have the opportunity now to do the whole thing at a reasonably low, well, a very low cost really, and that the cost in the future is clearly going to be higher. The next question that we addressed is the DOI compact funding. Chairman has written to the President advising that BSCC would regard any contribution, even if it was as equity, as a financing contribution, and therefore it could be repaid. So if it was contributed as equity, then we would repay it as dividends, and that allows us a certain amount of flexibility, obviously, within the financing. If we do it as debt, then it would need to be, I'm sure, subordinated to all of the other debt, and the lenders will have a lot of control over when we repay, and it'll be at the back end. But if we do it as dividends, then if our cash flows are good and our reserves are built up, then we can repay. So assuming that, we believe we can repay to 2025 to 2038. So not too far into the future. That's years 3 to 5 post ready for service. And then the fibre pair sale, how would that be constructed? Well, so far we're just guessing at what we're going to get offered. So we haven't entered into a negotiation yet, but what we believe we're going to be offered is half the cost of the branching unit, which is $1.75 million, plus $1.25 million for the extra fibre pair on the branch, which is more than the incremental cost. The incremental cost of putting the extra fibres in is about $700,000 to $800,000, and 1.25 gives us a handsome return on that. And then we would get an ongoing contribution for operating costs for O&M charges. So we'd get ongoing cash flow benefits as well through charging out operations and maintenance charges. So that fibre pair sale, it's important to note, is currently not in the BSCC business plan and is not in any of the numbers that we've provided to the Senate, and is not in anything. We haven't even told the banks. So that's like a wild card that we think is quite probable, but is not so far counted in any of the calculations. So it's a bonus. And then finally, the point that we're getting close to the point where we have to make decisions. You can see that where we are in November, end of November 2020, is where all of those milestones end up. And that's because we've got final documents coming in the next 2 weeks ready for signature. And the whole thing will be triggered by two events. One will be NEC wanting to close their contract with us, and I expect that to happen within a week or two. We've, I believe, settled all the commercial issues now between us. And the other trigger will be TPN wanting to close, and we have been told by TPN to expect 15th of December. So their lenders, the DFC, are currently reviewing all that documentation. Once they're happy, they'll send it on to us. So the point being, somewhere in the course of December, we're going to have to commit. The BSCC board is going to have to commit, and of course it would be very unwise to do so without the support of the OEK and the Senate in particular. So this is the time to make the decision, is really the point of that slide. Sure.
Do those contracts require the sovereign guarantee that you're requesting?
Yeah. The contracts that we're talking about do not. It's the debt. Yeah. The sovereign guarantee is for the debt, which is with JBIC, SMBC and AIFFP. So what will happen is the first contracts, take for example the Japanese lenders, they have a condition precedent in their contract, which is for us to contract with NEC. So once we contract with NEC, that is like the trigger for closing the financing, and it's the financing that needs a sovereign guarantee, not so much the NEC contract doesn't, but it does have a effectiveness clause in it so that we can sign it now that says subject to a sovereign guarantee being issued.
What's NEC?
Nippon Electronic Corporation, a huge Japanese electronics firm, the same company in fact that built PC1. So NEC is the largest Japanese telecommunications electronics firm. It's what's an equivalent, like Alcatel maybe is to France, NEC is to Japan, or like Subcom is to the United States.
Question, Senator Ngireva.
So I'm just trying to understand that whole NEC. So Japanese lending institution says, okay, we'll give you the money, but you gotta buy it from this guy.
Yeah.
And there's no bid. Whatever they're charging, we'll finance. Is that how this works?
Well, yeah, it sort of does, except that it's a little bit more kosher than that. So what we have here is a cable consortium that's established independent of us, nothing to do with us, that's going to build the Echo cable. And however they decided on NEC to be their supplier, I don't know. But once they decided on NEC, we don't get a choice. So if we select TPN, we select Echo, therefore we select NEC, so it's like a rolling consequence. So all of these, the TPN contract and the NEC contract, are regarded by all of these sponsors who do their due diligence as sole source contracts. They accept that they must be sole source because we want to connect to someone else's cable that's going by. So in a sense, yeah, But from the Japanese lender's point of view, you're quite correct. They're only prepared to lend up to 85% of the Japanese export value, which is the NEC component. So they are only lending to pay for NEC, so it's like a goes straight back to Japan type of deal, yes, most definitely. And I would comment that the Japanese lenders have been the least flexible of any of the other supporters. You know, the Australians came in with grants, the US came in with grants, no grants from Japan. We were able to get some small concessions from them, interest rate margin reduction, a bit of juggling to save us some money on the Nexi insurance and so forth. So they were prepared to compromise a little, but not much. But essentially that's an export support scheme, yes, from Japan's point of view, most definitely, no question.
That deadline is dependent on the TPN, the cable that's going by.
Yeah, the timetable is driven by the overall ECHO timetable. ECHO is a consortium of 3 parties, equal parties. 2 of them are what you'd call gigantic gorillas, Facebook and Google. So Facebook and Google have initiated the ECHO project without TPN, even though they know TPN exists and wants to join. So they already have got a project underway, irrespective of anything, they're going to go. Then TPN's come along and said, well, we'd like to join in and we've got this financing and blah, blah, blah. So what's going to happen is, the next thing that will happen is that the supply contract for ECHO is being modified right now to enable TPN to come in as a third party to that. So the NEC supply contract for ECHO, instead of being for Facebook and Google, pretty soon, within about 2 weeks, is going to be three parties. Once that third party TPN is in, then we can contract with them for access to the BU and for capacity on the ECHO cable, which we need going to Singapore and the US. So the ECHO timetable and that TPN entry there too is what's driving everything. Now, they are currently finalising their contract with NEC, therefore NEC is putting pressure on us to finalise our contract with them. And of course, once those things are done, then the lenders will come in and will sign up for the debt and the grants.
Okay, tell us the timeline and the whole project. When is it going to be done?
Yeah, the whole project, we would expect to see the first work would be occurring in late probably 2021, when we start work on the Palau side infrastructure to support the cable landing station. And then through 2022 we'll see the evidence of work occurring on the main system, and it'll be completed in December 2022. So it's very fast once it starts rolling. But the first stages, the stages through 2021 will be consumed with manufacturing. So NEC has to manufacture that cable, including all the repeaters and so forth, and finalisation of design and all that sort of stuff. We'll start letting contracts for the civil works and so forth towards maybe about the middle of 2021, and all done December 2022. Yes, we have a lot more material, of course, as you understand, but I thought it best to keep the presentation as simple as possible and maybe just use the other stuff to answer specific questions.
Senator Senior.
So I do have questions on, is this a submission or kami Chair? Thank you, them part try kale documents that we have. Okay. But calling it the door kami. Thank you. I'm gonna speak to the board members. Mga kamal komal masam na sabihin may manewing la presentation kalrubak. Hindi nga kasukal mga ato kami yung so kaloreng as kami murang kalbase. Tiagi del blaldo nga opinion kami yung mosisil was tiagi da time el gira del mutiang considering tiagi del two questions of chairman sa kumamle mention was given the situation or el angal dangaringi is this an investment el gira del kut maklear el all time makurang mas kami wabal si yun longer sa el alger as board members.
Oh, sulang asal malungil kerleng. Ngadiregal mal simbar tiang leng. Ndiak kora adaw tringi el bolungir belaw. Segi dia mal baktakla. Ak simbaleng tial pandemic kada ngarangire elang. Ma tial kora uncertainty ra tial tourism market rigid. Ako na marurigid mo karikla. Especially sel da ako na mura takora daw do. Di gale reasoning ral kora marurang akal mo ngil baso. First tiale repayment schedule ko ma'am. Mal sound. Koram le touch sel 60% growth decline sabi the weather say kita kora ayel experts amla mo omrula study kita lamot mura 20% maigel existing okya karamam PNCC ma Palau Telecoms even mla kora morewa tourist dir ngarinya revenue tir etira dir ka harar kamam Esel second reasoning ramam tale ndial sbedel koradi omes tal pandemic e koram rurgi del morawa at may tolo koradi amisel mot mura gire del omesra diversification ra economy rigid et tiagi da umrar muta on el katamal los peringil industry el mo o sbedel take advantage like industry wa technology, data centers, e-learning, e-medicine better ko diversify ra economy rigid. I'm worried. I think we all should be worried. I'm even more worried if ngaring break at existing cable and then not only in daus bedel nga skogil mo to but hindi ka communication na gidel mura ablulad.
Okay. I think that's a great question. Saragim startel kora prepare el mertegi del hearing kora orang salgireleng we did had some communication through email and sa daringil waseng akmal nga lang ngobraw del being a board member is rather stressful leng maral close stress kamam I haven't had a lot of sleep thinking about what to say here maral lobrada and I think abrada direct mal nga kami make that decision being a person in IT and I expressed this with the board members. The only business that I saw a boom in during the pandemic, al-ahmal dimla ka interference ngayon abay man leklo growth is in technology. If you look up our resources, my references that was Zoom, Locom Bali, Zoom was probably in the multi-million-dollar. Now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry because of this pandemic. So, like sa lolo nga gabing, akpay more worried about ulo mga namang matuktal existing PC1 and how are we gonna continue? Saya by more lolo worried nga. I think jumping into PC2 is a very big risk. but I think it's worth taking. I think this is probably the time to jump in. Sa al COVID, it forced our other residents and our citizens to become very innovative. I follow a lot of groups sa Facebook. At other lulu magit, amlamo magit through Facebook. So it's innovation. People are being creative because of this pandemic. And so in order for us to continue supporting the innovation, creativity, we have to have infrastructure in place that would foster that and continue to support it. And also being in education, we need it in education definitely. Also kung mang moringa case rebelaw mang stop school or the do distance education, el matuka gaybol and we're pretty much at a loss lang mo dakal sa pedal continue. Bigay kita input.
From my point of view, I stand by the board's decision. I believe it is very important to proceed with the project. It might not be the best time to proceed, but in the future, who's to guarantee that it will be an ideal or the perfect situation as well? The window is closing. Personally, I believe if I had a share or had to spend money in this project, I believe in it enough to provide or to move forward with it, and that's my standpoint.
Masara Grime, Senator. Oy malo klolu do, ama klolu do, de mal bring el time. Ding umdas mo set take that time. It's time el gira del osiga urel rula system get more resilient. Because right now kita mal depender tial gipol. El wal mga Fibre board members el matuk I don't think we can revert back to satellite. Tial opportunity in lang rakabela pretty soon doesn't come around all the time. We don't need the capacity now, but we will be needing it soon. And the cable's coming for new opportunities with this business. So I think we should look at that very carefully. Sulang.
Madam Sulang, Senator, nga tinaklo marat kung way sa gida. You said sa gida, mla increase pasra sa elasara light to. Already kal adra kay tira government, I was contacted by PNCC was a sel lamatuka gable ng rapak up. And they told me was a based sa klunga elasara light. And tadi mo on rawane mo ma office president adera gida mo dia. Internet kita mo dia may Zoom kita connector kita mo nang kita outside mo dia they've said everything that needs to be said but mal support rapport dal dire ang sulang
Kamang Aritaya.
Malungila reasoning kami ngakaupang kami lomarak masya way gay infrastructure sa gilid nga safety net ringi. Kadam na PUC makadaplo lomarak masinggirin nga nga ongerul masil tinggi sa matamala imo. Di akmal bigi krisel position kami ulondas matel gay bola mamalo drak lugo. Sige ta imol bori nga. Wal talal mag sweek mutiam tamala. Just because nam tamala sa ibal baby rawalu. Sige ta baik pikir nging luldaso. Uldaso mo manak masitya mo matamala. Sige da bori nga ding ako manak masinggirin nga niya substitute cable make sure ka connect tergidan ma restablurat el matamal tel imong kabay mangal mo makit ding tiksel ndal atik akpigi krisegi luldasul masing tiamo matamal aklu I hope kodom dasungil o sige nga the reason yakdamorngi other than dasung masya tiamo matamal.
Muta, Senator Senior.
Komal misula regal alda the meu nga ka mal lultoy regal blamdong expertise kami emal so kal reference tagi del report del provider ya chair Senator Inabo which was included in our packet title niya economic impact assessment tra proposed second fiber optic submarine cable for Palau. Sel sual mo and I hope you have a copy. Sel sual mo niya page 8. Ngarcel 2.2.2 risk mitigation. The reason why so kalo Mr. Tiang so ako mo isang kalwasing well ko standard in the industry. Ang nga niya resiliency ang nga niya wal number 2 lesel ko mesay gal balo ang umisin din nga others too. American Samoa, Federated States of Micronesia FSM. Fiji 4, Guam 12, Kidawan, Papua New Guinea 2, Northern Marianas Islands 2, Samoa 2, Mungswa kalogya kami ulwasay, sing waisay sil kura omiwe kaningi ulwasay ka wal standard the industry girel ngani tagi del backup.
Yeah, that's a good question. Robin, she was just asking if that redundancy of having a second cable is standard in most countries. But nimna sa morsele krime Senator Akitaya girela tigingam girela cable tuluk. Yes, we wish for the best and then we plan for the worst. We've only focused on the possibility of, or the reasoning behind this is being the possibility of a compromised or cut cable. But I think what we didn't go into detail is, there's benefits for this PC2 as well. The first is the connection. El Atial PC1 Regith, the first cable, that's in Davao, and then comes to. Right, but
Our connection is only to Guam.
right, but the cable, the main trunk goes from Davao to Guam, and we connect through a branching unit. That's a one-way route through Guam to the U.S. That's the only way we can go right now. So we are limited by going through Guam. PC2 has this the branching unit, which has a new two-way technology that has connectivity back and forth, one way and the other way. And it doesn't go through Guam. It goes directly from Singapore to the U.S. and it's a higher capacity. So there's benefits there, but we didn't really go into that. The second question was, maybe you can answer better, Robin, about the standard of having multiple cables.
It really depends on the nation. So if you take the case of Australia, Australia had no high-speed connections in 1999, none. Okay. In 2000, the first high-speed connection was built, which was the Southern Cross Cable Network, and it was built as a loop network. Now, the cost of that was $1.5 billion. But the reason why it was built as a loop network was it was the only connection. So in effect, they had to build two connections, or a loop-type configuration, to enable that very redundancy in their first cable. And then the second cable that was built, second high-speed connection for Australia, was AJC, Sydney to Guam, to Japan. A different route, completely diverse, and that gave resilience for Australia that was beyond even what was provided in the first. And now there's half a dozen of those big high-speed cables. So, in the Pacific, Australia and New Zealand were the first countries to become connected with high speed, and all of them opted for multiple connections right from day one. The problem is cost. So when we deal with a small nation, I was in Solomon Islands for 5 years before I came here. In the case of Solomon Islands, our ambition was for two cables, one connecting Honiara to Sydney and another one connecting Honiara to Vanuatu, which would enable connection through to Fiji and onwards. So for exactly the same reasons. So the ideal is a minimum of two there's no actual industry standard. The industry standard is the more the merrier, but one's not enough. That is definitely the industry standard. So the reason why a lot of these Pacific islands have only got one connection is because that's all that can really be afforded. We can here do 2 connections for $44 million of Palau money going out, whereas the Coral Sea cable that's connecting Solomons cost about $125 million because they haven't got a branching unit solution. So by using 2 branching unit solutions, we can bring our cost down to affordable within the Palau economy and still get the benefits of that resilience and redundancy.
Kalmut agitaya.
I see. Yeah, woman sa rongil reason kay biak kring si tila PNCC meeting earlier said capability that second cable to do business the other way, and that will be the reason why akmo supported yan effort. Kunso lang.
Alba Senator Cuarte po.
Sulara te ale malwilita sil se chair sa kuma. Ako ta amen and then ngaria tul question and the kora gera tul clarification. Ako na suesera bodolar sel there was 1.8 million in kadam lomara sovereign guarantee amle tinga karsel ta madilwa se kora waya do sogora sovereign guarantee. Magda kilo ko tumutya ro gir mang obligator sel kor overall the obligation or olbira kalulaw klela sovereign guarantee el sabel girel tiaro giren di gidam lo gira 1.8 million ya kung da sa segida ulmuguk ka orang aria kora gilbetek ng amle conversation na kasi kadung ere selbo already so sedi comment. Ang ero al sabem clarify agel contribution am rigel marisel 7 million el ngara COFA fund ma 3.8 million el ngara USAID ay akting sa Robin el luwase gel COFA fund ay gera mo BSCC mo payback es el 3.8 SEDI grant le under the resolution ang under a grant floor mga gira del mo o masasal language sa resolution. Okay, so lang. Ang ide ngara kostra if we fish, ngara kostra if we cut the bait. What's the difference? What's the cost? Ngara difference cost between if we fish and if we cut the bait?
If we fish now, the cost is 30 million all up, of which about 16 million will be debt. If we do it at some point in the future, let's say 5 years' time, and just put in a branching unit now, the cost will be, we think, about $36 million or $6 million more. So out of that 30 million, we can see a $3 million reduction for the fibre pair sale. So instead of 30, it comes down to 27, yeah? So the cost in the future would be 27 plus 3, 30, plus 3 for mobilisation, 33. So it's 27 now versus 33 in the future. So the cost is 20% lower. And then the other issues relate to various financing risks. That is to say, could we assemble even a financing package? Could we find lenders who are prepared to lend to us? And then at what rates? How much grant could we get? And we'd say there's some risk associated with getting as good a package as we have now with $16 million debt against what we might be able to assemble in the future.
Okay, thank you. And can you clarify what economic leakage mean? And the conversation with Senior was that PNG had 2 cable, and somewhere in the literature that was provided, they compared Palau to, or potentially what Palau would be, compared to PNG, Philippines, and Indonesia. And while PNG has 2 cable, I noticed that the growth of GDP was very small. what are the factors and how do we think that Palau would actually do better?
The PNG2 cable thing is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. So the first cable that they're counting there is actually a stopgap emergency measure that was taken back in about, maybe about 2004-05, where they took an old cable and repurposed it, cut it, moved it from Sydney, it was Packrim West, and moved it around and connected it to Port Moresby. This was an obsolete cable that had been abandoned, but it was picked up off the ocean floor and repurposed and gave limited cable connectivity to PNG, but very limited. The second cable is the Coral Sea cable, which has only just been completed, so I don't think we've seen the economic impact of that. But my answer in the PNG case is the first cable really was a kind of half-baked solution that was put in place when the satellite connectivity failed in PNG. It was an emergency measure. It had no discernible GDP impact other than preventing an absolute catastrophe. The new cable that's being connected now gives them genuine high-speed connectivity, and there's where we would expect to see economic impact. So PNG is not a great example because it's only just been connected even after Palau. The Coral Sea cable was only connected late last year.
Can you clarify what economic leakage is?
So, economic leakage in the GHD document, I got no idea, to be honest. GHD, economic consultants retained by the AIFFP to produce this study, not by us. And we haven't had the opportunity to do a debrief with them because of COVID. But my understanding is this, that what they're talking about is a linkage between what businesses can operate in an economy and how that economy is supported by connectivity. So it's almost like, I guess these days, connectivity is becoming similar to water supply and electricity. It's like a prerequisite for economic development. So that's the linkage, is that it's now critical infrastructure for virtually every economy, and more so. Then the way the GHD study worked was, first of all, they worked out what's the cost of an outage and how many outages do we predict in our forecast period. And that's how they got their first chunk of value, was just by looking at saving the cost of an outage. So that's their first chunk of value. Then they looked at the additional enhancements that could occur in the education and health sectors by virtue of these high-speed direct links to Singapore and the United States, and identified some additional benefits that accrue beyond the general economic benefit for those sectors. And then finally, they identified two new sectors that don't exist currently in Palau that would be enabled by having a robust, resilient cable connection. And those were just examples, but one was a call centre business and one was a data centre business. So that's how they constructed the study, and they layered those benefits up so that you can see, in crude terms, the way I see it, in crude terms, they've proved that the cable pays for itself in terms of economic resilience. That is to say, the economic rate of return is 8.4% just on resilience. And then they build all those additional benefits to get up to that $37 million net present value by these additional layers in the education sector, in the health sector, and then these two other additional businesses.
Namungin. Ngaria kamenta. Senator ni Evan.
So, Daily Chair, I'm going to go back to our hearing many months ago. Atol lamil dungra. I think it was you. The only one not in red. A concern I have comes down to cost. Degal cost tara BSCC, degal cost tara PNCC. And it goes back to sales statement that was data connectivity is already namuadingi. It's something we need to survive in this day and age. Ma question na talugur sel time masirado southern tial sakit or BU branching unit and eventually kad mom sadra wabasel second gable and merangat mau. Sel cost el morangel maas marubak gel ngalgara school ospera deng waring brula subelel el gel momara airtime, which is not your issue. I understand that you're the wholesaler. What is the cost analysis? I know it's a long document and we all like to read textbooks, but at the end of the day, BSCC's selling price to PNCC, Palau Wi-Fi, Palau Telecom, it's at this pricing structure now. Okay, put the second cable in. Where is it going to be? Is it going to be the same? Medio, Morbab? Lisel understanding rangak? Or serada da dura last? Las el di malmol malubang tigil mangat. Now, not to that textbook. Kadangara sela COVID. Insert kumindir ko sisiu not change.
I'll do it.
I think Robin can go into this more into detail, but the short answer, Senator, is there will be no change for our price structure because we've already kind of worked that out. But I want to say that with a big caveat, like you said, we don't control the RSPs, retail service providers' pricing structure to the final customers. We have nothing to do with that. But yeah, our price structure will remain the same.
I'd make this observation. In telecommunications, there's a law of gravity that appears to apply to pricing. Prices never go up, they only come down. Retail prices on anything. Whether it's a phone call, megabit per second, whatever it is, prices can only ever come down. So if we had our prices set too low to recover and repay PC2, we'd be in serious trouble. But in fact, they're not. And the reason how it works is that the repayment profiles that have been designed by AIFFP, SMBC and so forth are designed to take account of the fact that we've already got $25 million of ADB debt that we've got to service. So they have stretched their repayment times out to 20 years to enable not too much hit on our cash flow. That's the first point. The second point is this, that our impact on retail prices is relatively small now. And the reason for that is, if you look at the price of, let's say $100 for your data connection on your home phone, on a DSL line, out of that $100, probably $80 is PNCC cost, and, sorry, 80. Out of the $100, $80 is PNCC internal cost, cost of distributing, all that, overheads, payroll, all that, and only 20% is BSCC cost. So if we were to reduce our prices to zero, which is obviously impossible, the benefit to the consumer would merely be a 20% price reduction. So we're not a huge component of the retail. That's another important point. And the third point is that back in 2017, we were informed by the Minister of Finance that the balance of the ADB funds beyond what it cost to build just the first cable to Nerram-Lengwe was available to Palau, and he instructed us to find a way to spend it to the benefit of the Palau telecommunications sector. And that's how stage 2 and 3 of our plan came about, because of that request. So we knew back in 2017 we were going to spend all 25 million, and we built that into our pricing right from the start. Then further in 2018, when we looked at the growth, it was faster than we expected, so we actually reduced our pricing again by another 30%, because BSCC is not to make profit, it's just to recover costs. And in the future, we expect to see our prices come down and down over time. They definitely cannot go up. That's just a market reality. Nobody accepts telecoms prices going up in the retail sector, so therefore they can't go up at the wholesale sector either. So the outlook for BSCC is reducing prices over time. The impact on that will be minimal though, because of that same effect of the 20%, 80%, 80-20 rule thing in the cost structure of the delivered service. So the benefits to the consumer are not going to be realised really in price gains, no matter how much. Even when we go beyond repaying all the debt and we're on operating costs only, the benefits to the consumer for price are going to be minimal, but the quality will be vastly improved. And that's where the gain is for the consumer. So for the consumer, for the same price, they get a much better quality service. Now, that's basically the realities of being a wholesaler in this market. We have to, you know, we're selling a commodity really. It's the same as if we were selling rice or wheat or something like that. It's just wheat, you know, it's just bits per second. As long as there's no faults, it's no different from any other bit per second from any other supplier. It is definitely a commodity item, and our philosophy is keep our overheads as low as possible to deliver the best quality wholesale product. And that's what it's all about. But it's not really, I don't think it's a retail pricing issue. It's about infrastructure support and a wholesale issue. You know, at the retail level, the impact is better quality, but definitely probably not much movement in prices.
It's like raising minimum wage, right?
There's never a good time to raise the minimum wage, whereas there is a good time to build a second cable.
Continue, Senator Ngireban, I'm sorry.
So let's share and that member ka meeting. Rabotoka togol I understand there's a timing issue, and I want to talk about that fiber pair sale a bit. Granted, it's not guaranteed. It may happen. Most likely will happen, but so. Akmo US government, let's say we're going to do it. They want it, and of course it benefit the mergidon. Di ko Mr. Tial ko structure ko omral wasing las el mutul moklo adong. One, they're going to share in the branching unit, and we said that's 1.75 million. Okay, they're going to pay for some of the cost of the cable. I'm assuming more glass fibers, right? That's 1.25 million. That's 3 million. Why don't they have a share in the cost of laying the cable as well? Understanding, I see in that cost structure there's going to be operations and maintenance. I'm assuming that's going to the the cable repair ship, you know, those are sort of things, maintaining the landing station, etc. But the installation cost, essentially they're taking half of the cable. You know, we only needed 2 pair, and now we're going to put in 4 pair because we're going to sell it, right? So shouldn't they be paying half of the installation cost? Just a thought.
I 100% agree with you. We have not negotiated anything on this point. All I'm telling you is what they have hinted they're going to offer. We will push back, definitely. And I mean, the logic is inexorable. If it's half the branching unit, why isn't half the branch? So yes, we will push back, but I cannot guarantee what the result will be.
Senator Mariur.
KB akoradi oger sisera
Seng 2017 sa bolurur tel cable. Seguida bolurur tel cable man netela arar se umulo gordira ngaram noi. Netela oito seguir. Kaya sokan mo nang li seguir ra bagul man may galgari.
Sulang floor sel PC1 al mle diplora 2017 alak with mle 19 million arala cable. Initial financing ramam ra ADB amle 25 million. Musel direction ra leadership at that time akmong sel model sel drangel agi mo spengil improve infrastructure sel internal infrastructure fiber network kagidar belaw sige daw ul naring sel agil slides ra phase 2 phase 3 al installer sel Circle Island fiber network sige da ko ra relia network kagidar mo equitable mo trigger ro gulo speringi malakal di one al provider as el connector ang aram lunguye marabong etiril resta spe a radio ko ra connected mo makita connection tir sige da amle ko ra breakdown na financing sel PC1
Hindi akakwado kaya sige dileng hindi aksal model waseng ra klakaro sa tegi del hotel gaibol matalong eril gaibol ela ko masendori milyon na tal longerul gaibol sige dia sokan mo nalil waseng ra kwa mal difference ay gidel edir gat 2017 melal 2020 ang sige da so adan mo nalia sel difference ringi resulta mendiregal sel tagi lem du kwaseng equitable distribution kung daseng kuk PNCC dim la auda mrula deng wara blur bela ngo cable makumda sa tigel kuk pepira bet mo at sel tul ngur gumiu alungul ngara ay gale disk eng segid ya kuk komlangul mastrir makumda senda ka pa mo mal uben sorry de tuk te kol ganektra sel sengar kami verulia ilanda kal kuk polos pa cable tuk mamrula agreement lo bangela PNCC le PNCC o cable le kablo belo mamda solo aseng til ay gidel equitable la dire kal gidel mal mongilo mesringil elang kadamle 19 million kadungulo ko dirang aram lungoy ela kadam almu to repeat si siulo mrul ngaringin already ngaringira a PNCC ngaringa cable ringil le kablo belo makumda sa igigid yang ungil ay gadi dul corporation sa blue belaw makumda sa singkire del makalorer girel nga rin ungil planning mang seldo ngotmok sa pelt makalorer mandi ako do ngisoy sa osisiulurer akwa ding sa igid del kori sa igid del tegi del cost ringil mlara dukasen 20 million nga ogisit tal hotel gable marong erong wasen 2 million yobengel sa igid asel du kwasen 2 million ending nga 16 million natin. Siya kamu tidak mas model waseng Raul magdangar sa igidel.
Sulang floor akmo may detailed financing questions sul mura Robin aigel kora kakaraw sa teletel sel PC1 ma PC2. Di sel history ra tel Festun network tel Circle Island network nganya kora history ringil dira spell sa ringa Robin ending at that time, it was seen as the best option to create that equitable access al mura ngaram langoy, and I believe there was negotiation with PNCC, and I think that there was a little bit of an issue with using their existing network. Kung sige daw ulo ka himle ko ra decide al marut tal BSL network it's underground, it's more secure, and it has a higher capacity, almost unlimited capacity. So I get if you want to answer that question.
So if we compare PC1 at let's say 19.5 million roughly to PC2 at roughly 30 million, there's two primary points of difference. The first point of difference is that the branching unit on PC1 is a relatively simple and low-cost branching unit, measured in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's only capable of really taking our fibre pairs and moving them in one direction towards Guam. There's no switching capability in that branching unit. It just connects. It's like a T-junction on a pipe. It has no intelligence. But the branching unit on PC2 is a power switch branching unit which enables intelligence and enables the branching unit to be remotely reconfigured as required. So therefore that branching unit can carry traffic east or west, and it can also be reconfigured in various ways by the network operating centre. So it's a higher cost branching unit that enables us to direct traffic both east and west. That's the first point of difference. The second point of difference is the capacity itself on the trunk. So we're connected to the CUS cable for PC1, and our 500 gigabits on CUS is in the guard band of their capacity. That is, we're like a hitchhiker on their cable. It doesn't cost them anything, and they get money for it. On the PC2 cable, we will be full tenants. We will have 500 gigabits of main cable capacity. It's not on the guard band. It's in the main cable. And it's going from Singapore to the US, not from a branching unit to Guam, which is only about 1,000 kilometres. So the cost of that capacity is much higher as well. So it's those two factors combined that account for the cost difference between PC1 and PC2. And it emphasises the point that once PC2, if we go ahead, if PC2 is installed, it will become our primary connection, and PC1 will be the backup, because PC2 is vastly superior in terms of its capabilities. Its reach to Singapore and US are much better connection points than Guam. In both cases, our service providers here can connect to the world by paying what's called IP transit at a rate that's measured in the US. Typical IP transit's under 10 cents per megabit per second per month. In Guam, it's measured in dollars per megabit per second per month. So from the retail service provider's point of view, these connectivity points in the US and Singapore are vastly superior to Guam. And that's the advantage we buy with the second cable. Not that we have all that many options anyway, because if we wanted to put some other branching unit on there that didn't fit their specification, they wouldn't let us anyway. You know, we don't get a lot of choices in the design here. It's kind of imposed on us by the trunk. So in the case of the first cable, we had to accept what we could get. And in the case of the second cable, pretty much the same thing as well. But what we can get on the second cable is better.
Okay, so can I ask a question? We asked BNCC how much they're paying the Lomo Pacific in Guam for being their transit, and they said 18,000 per month. That's the amount that's going to come down?
Yeah, so that's their IP transit cost, I would say. I don't know for sure because I'm not privy to their accounts, of course. But that sounds like their IP transit cost to buy IP transit in Guam from DPAC, yes. And that's the very sum, yes, Senator, that's the sum that we're talking about. So that would come down by possibly an order of magnitude. So it would come down by, divide by 10, maybe.
Okay, so my follow-up question is, this PNCC right now has that transit contract in Guam. Are they going to be maintaining more transit contracts, like one in Singapore, one in the US, and one in Guam? Is that what they're going to be doing?
Undoubtedly, that's what they're going to be doing. But these contracts are not like some fixed amount, 18,000 a month. No, these contracts are per megabit per second per month. So they'll go up and down depending on the amount of traffic. So if the traffic in Guam goes down to zero or near zero, the IP transit cost in Guam will go down to near zero. It's variable on the volumes. So what we expect to see is a migration of traffic from Guam, which is currently 100%, to be more like probably 80% US, 20% Singapore, 0 Guam.
I see. So they'll have an option on where to go.
Yes, exactly. So once we put in the second cable, the service offering we will make to the retail service providers here is essentially on the same price list, but instead of having no options, they'll have 3 termination options that they can choose and change. So they will have a reconfigurable network within, if their overall capacity was whatever it is, say 6 gig in the case of PNCC, they could put 4 gig to the US, 2 gig to Singapore, none to Guam, or then they might say, oh, we want a gig to Guam, we'll reduce the whatever. And if they do their contracts correctly for IP transit, their costs will go up and down depending on the volumes that they put through those termination points.
Okay, my other question is, that means the market will be more open to new retailers to come in, and how do you are you going to be selling to those people, and what kind of infrastructure should they be having here, and how will that connect to PNCC? Just
Okay. At the moment, we only sell to licensed Palau retail service providers. That's it. And we have had inquiries from a number of carriers who are Guam-based or elsewhere for capacity into Palau. For example, Bank of Hawaii is currently, I believe, looking at a private line connection that improves their connectivity, and heaven knows they could use it. They approached IP&E in Guam and IT&E in Guam, sorry, and they approached us and we said sorry and gave them back the 3 retail service providers' contact details here. So the way it sits at the moment, BSCC would not do anything with any external party. It would be done through the retail sector here. As to whether a second cable influences the number of service providers here, I don't think so. I don't think it has any relevance. So the number of licensees here is determined by the Bureau of Communications based on their assessment of the market. If they wanted to bring in a third or a fourth or a fifth or sixth, fourth or fifth or sixth licensee, they could do so now, but they don't because the market couldn't handle it, right? And when the second cable comes in, I doubt that will change. So I don't really know that they're related. What it would enable is a carrier, let's say Digicel, for example, to set up a low-cost operation in Palau, if it was allowed by the Bureau, right, where they managed it remotely using that high-speed reliable high-speed connectivity and put virtually no infrastructure in here and no people, just cherry-pick type solution. Whether that's nothing to do with us, that's a decision for the Bureau of Communications. So I guess you could argue that a boost in overall economic activity and the GDP and Palauan economy would mean that the Palauan economy could support more retailers, maybe so, but as to whether it does or it doesn't, I see that as purely a regulatory issue. Yeah, the regulator's got to make a decision about what's reasonable for Palau. It's a tricky one. We know that there's 3 at the moment and they kind of survive, although in time of COVID it's pretty tricky, but generally they can survive. Could 4 survive? I doubt it. Could 5? But that's the judgment that the regulator's got to make. I don't see that the cable connectivity is directly related to that question. It's more the size of the overall economy and how all the service providers are going economically and all those sort of questions. Nothing to do really with connectivity.
Okay, with the COVID-19 economic impact right now and your revenue reduction being reduced by 60% or
No.
40%?
20.
20%. That's the reduction you have. I'm looking at your financial report and you had about 3 million revenue in 2019.
And about 3 million again.
3 million in 2020. So that means that your maximum revenue a year, or I don't know how you're going to grow your market beyond
Well, our
that.
market grows. This is how it comes.
And how are you going to support all these loans? Loan repayment. Are you very confident that you can support
Yes.
your cash flow will support repayment of these all the interest and the principals on
Yes.
all these loans?
Yes.
Plus pay the Republic of Palau.
Yes, there will be no. The probability of any call on the Republic of Palau to back up this guarantee, I would put at improbable, very improbable. I'm very confident there will be no call on the Republic. And the reason for that is, if you refer back to our growth charts, right, that's flattened off at the moment. The reason it's flattened off at the moment is because COVID. There's no tourists here. The market shrunk, but our demand has not shrunk. Our demand continues to slightly increase. Once the tourists come back, it'll resume increasing and we will get revenue growth.
Are you going to execute the contract to repay the 7 million compact funding with the government of Palau?
Yeah, we've already offered, the Chairman has already offered to the Republic to repay at an interest rate of 1%.
But is that going to be in writing?
To be, yeah, but so far not, but it has to be. The way I see it, the government is sitting back on that issue, waiting to see what happens with the sovereign guarantee. When the sovereign guarantee is done, then they'll move on to that next step, which is the formal terms under which that equity contribution or loan or whatever it's going to be, that funding would come into BSCC. We've recommended it should go in as equity and come out as dividends. That's the simplest solution.
Okay, on this economic study, the conclusion on the last page, and I want to read that. It says the PC2 project, if only considered on the basis that it provides a second submarine cable to Palau to secure communication resilience, should be rejected as it fails to achieve all the financial and the economic returns hurdles that a successful project should achieve. But the economic viability of the project increases substantially when the expected benefits of the project's specific development operations and the general economic uplift are overlaid with expected impact of the tourism, education, and new enterprise mobilized in Palau as a result of total redundancy. Meaning, this PC2 project by itself as a redundancy project is not financially viable unless we get to do the new industry that you mentioned, like the call center and the data storage centers. But those are way out in the future because it's predicting 7 years and 10 years before those kind of investment could be pouring into the country.
Yeah.
So I want your explanation on that, please.
Okay. They say it's not economically viable because they applied a hurdle rate of 9%. It actually returns 8.4%. So they're saying if it returned 9% it'd be economic, at 8.4% it's not. Now that's a purely arbitrary point, and in economic theory they should use the weighted average cost of capital, as you know, for the discount rate, which would probably be, what, 2%, 3%? So in effect, by using a hurdle rate of 9%, they've established that the resilience effects are break even. So if you have a look at the summary of their conclusions right back at the start, or here it is on page unnumbered, but just above that conclusion at 5.1.1, the economic impact summary, you'll see there the economic net present value of just the resilience, which is called GDP1, is minus 1.9 million, okay? But that's only minus 1.9 million because they used a discount rate of 9%. If they used a discount rate of 8%, it would be positive, because it returns 8.4%. So they just applied a very harsh threshold to reach that conclusion, the first conclusion, that it's uneconomic on its own. And then the second thing is the tourism and education benefits, which are substantial. In fact, the tourism benefits are rated at 35 million on their own, do not require any call centres or anything. That's just the benefits within the existing tourism business. So I think there's a couple of things about this GHD study. The first thing is that their use of a 9% discount rate is highly questionable. I can't justify it. I don't see how anyone could, given that the weighted average cost of capital in this case is much lower than 9%. And then the second point is that within the tourism and education sectors we'll get gains whether or not those forecast, data centre and call centre businesses eventuate in 6 or 7 years or not. So this project is definitely not dependent on those additional businesses to be justified from a Palau perspective. This project can be justified from a Palau perspective just on the economic resilience. That is, it breaks even at economic resilience. If you apply any discount rate lower than 9%, 8%, 7%, 6%, anything, any of those rates will all give you a positive result just on economic resilience. So I think in terms of the justification from a Palau perspective, it's clearly justified on its own, just the redundancy. And then the rest of it is all icing on the cake.
Okay, the economic report is when you evaluate a project, that's how you evaluate it, whether it adds to GDP and the cost to operate and everything else. The internal rate of return is configured, like average, this is how much the project should be made, especially for a non-profit entity like this. So our concern is not generating enough revenue to pay the second loan, but the board support your decision that this is a good project, and the add-on GDP right now is not very much. It's less than 2%, and that's because of the new industry that's going to come in. But I like to believe the board that maybe that's the only industry we have right now that's going to be growing, because nothing else is growing right now. I want to make sure you can pay these loans, all this interest now, 2021, 2022 to 2030. Can you do that?
Yes, we can. And I would note that we've been servicing interest on the ADB debt since 2018. And we start paying the principal year after next. We've already accumulated a surplus of over $3 million in the first couple of years of operations towards that. So our track record is good, and it's certainly regarded as good enough by the lenders. I think one of the things that maybe the committee could take considerable comfort in is the fact that this has been poured over by all the lenders who've provided all kinds of due diligence exercises to determine whether this is a good project or not, and they've concluded it is. So you can rely, I guess, to some extent on the GHD report that AIFFP has done its due diligence, it's tested what's the sensitivity of our modelling, and that's that thing about the 60%. So on our model, we expect a 25% reduction in revenue in 2021. But on AIFFP modelling, we can withstand a 60% revenue reduction and still pay the debt. Assuming that it's short-lived. We're assuming the COVID dip doesn't last forever, obviously. If the COVID dip lasts for 20 years, all bets are off.
How long can you last if this continues and the economy recovers slowly and not as?
That's what we've modelled. So we can model a steeper decline, a slower recovery than what we think is realistic, and substantially deeper dip.
5 years, 3 years.
It's not a question of survive, I don't think, because, there's no answer to that question. The question is, what are we supposed to assume? Zero revenue, 50%, 10%? I need parameters. But we are very robust in terms of our cash. There is no call on that current BSCC cash balance in our forecast. In fact, we will build our cash reserves over the forecast period on what we've modelled. So we've got $3 million of cash buffer which is enough to enable us to operate for 2 years, just sitting there as backup, untouched by this project, yes. And that assumes we don't accumulate any more, we might well do. So yeah, it's pretty robust.
Even after paying out what you need to invest in this PC2, the 1.2 million. Is it 1.2 million, right?
Yeah, I'm assuming that goes out the door, yes, straight off, yes. So our current bank balances are over 4 million actually, but some of that's got to go out straight away, as you point out. It's already committed. Yeah.
Namongil? Okay po. Senator Senior.
Malmasaw la chair ay malungil question na rin ko kira la yagi yalwa kura tora do. But I also want to say that this is kind of related to what Senator Cuarte talked about in linkages. Also in the same report, it talks 4.212 in development opportunities and social impacts. Makti sukal ko kura mo support agel dilong communal board members ra wase sige 4.212 wase a number of further development options could enhance the economic benefits that result from an indirect linkage al mortigi del PC2 project, either in financial terms of community outcomes, and they include 1, safety, better communication, reliable communications for a community that is widespread and on occasions isolated, the way of life, opportunities for the option of working outside home environments, and telehealth allows for interaction with higher skilled medical resources than are available or below. So I'm sure Senator Cuarte improvements are saying the telehealth. Training across all sectors of the economy to internet resiliency and capacity. Lang mo sa edal di Zoom in terms of conferences, and especially now during this COVID, yakpay mesa nga malungi luulang gira dal ngatmo kartiay dia polso bel nga igay dia capacity ri dal ngaray kay dal Zoom conferences ma akora din eswa kal tinga akora osingir say dia as compared to what Senator Inabo has said lang mral kora nga niya sa bakreng rigit say dia capability of BSCC to be able to pay back or take the loan. Mang kura am deswa kal ko ang final hindi kita Robin el kura malmla give us assurance. Kura the ukramings from you, Chair KB.
Sulang Senator. Yeah. Robin did go into detail on the repayment of the loan and the possible scenarios and benefits to safety, way of life, and health. I think those are things that also are difficult to quantify. So yes, I think it's good to take studies like that into account, especially when you're making a decision of this magnitude. But yeah, I think we also have to look at the intangibles as well.
Senator Hirebang.
So, Chair, there's a few things I just wanted some clarity on. That project, 3 million, I say. And what I heard was we're going to be in debt for 16 million only. Can I get that more clarification and explanation on that? So how is the other 14 million being paid? Yeah, could we go through that? Yeah.
The biggest contribution is the 7 million, which we know about the compact funds. So there's 7 million. Then there's the $3 million from USAID. So that takes us up to 10 million. Then there's another 800,000 from USAID. So that's, let's call it 11 million. And then we've got at 850,000 from AIFFP. That's another million odd. So we're now at 12. And then I think there's some other, there's some bank fees from, the rest of it's Australian anyway, in little bits and pieces. But the big chunks are the 7 million, the 3 million, the 800,000 and the 900,000. Also, it's worth noting that we've got full contingency in this project plan, and the likelihood of us drawing down on contingency is quite low. So those are fully including contingency, all those numbers.
So just to recap, one of the risks if this project doesn't proceed at this time, there's a possible loss of about 7 million in grant money, because 7 million is COFA money that you're going to repay back, but there's also 7 million roughly in grant money from the United States and Australia and others. United States and Australia.
Yeah.
That are part of the total financing for this project.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that.
Yeah, that's correct. So getting those grants on the table again would be quite difficult. You're quite right, yes. Maybe we could get the 7 million, but the other bits might be tricky, yeah.
Sulara clarification is Senator Ngire-Aban. I have a question on the, if you get this second cable, then all the internet companies here on island do not have to have any other backup facility, right? Am I correct to assume
That's correct.
that?
In fact, they don't anyway. They don't now.
Okay, so they don't have any satellite?
No, the only satellite we have now is limited satellite that's used currently to service the Southwest Islands and remote communities. Now, if there was an outage on BSCC now, today, that satellite capacity would be diverted from the Southwest Islands and reconfigured to service Karoo. And it would probably survive, it would probably support email for government, and that's about it, not much more. So there would be no requirement for them to have any backup, because you know, it would need the 1 in a million chance of both cables being broken at once. So, yeah.
But still, you will not charge them for providing backup.
That's correct.
So we're expecting a reduction in the cost of them being connected to satellite for backup in any.
Well, no, because they're not currently, so there'll be no reduction. They've already taken those savings. They have already reduced from 500 PNCC is reduced from 500 meg of satellite in 2017 down to about 100 meg today. So they've already actually realised those savings.
Senator Ahitaya.
Last one, KB. Now, if we use PC2, PC2 breaks, so we come back to use PC1 cable for business. If we have major business activities to Asia, utilizing PC2, and it's damaged. So, can we continue like major banking and stuff like that? And how are we going to be cut off from that business, or?
It's an excellent question. We would not be cut off. So that business could still be transacted via Guam. However, it wouldn't have the same quality of connection. It wouldn't have, for example, if you take one of the key factors in the quality of connection, especially for long distances, is latency, as you probably well know. The lower the latency, the better the quality of the services that the end consumer sees. And And in fact, the more profitable the telco is as well, so it turns out. So what would happen is, in the event of a break on PC2, as you correctly state, we would switch back to PC1. That would then endure for the period until PC2 was repaired, so it's only temporary. That's the first important point. And then the second point is, from Guam, it can still travel by a circuitous route back to, say, Singapore. For example, from Guam, there are cables to Japan, and from Japan back to Singapore. There is no direct cable Guam to Singapore, but there are routes either via Japan or via Australia that would get back to Singapore, and that would increase the latency on those services. So if you were gaming, for example, to a server in Singapore, you might notice a degradation. You might get killed more often because you're slower or something like that, but it would still work.
Do you imagine the cost would be higher than if we have
Yeah, the cost,
on PC2?
yeah, the cost to PNCC, for example, would increase because they'd have the higher IP transit costs in Guam temporarily. They'd need to have flexible contracts. There's a lot of, I guess, national infrastructure thinking that needs to go on about how we manage between all of us, you know, the infrastructure that we've got. But it's not impossible to figure out. And essentially what would happen is we'd have maybe a 30-day odd period where we'd have degraded services but still effective, and then they'd be returned to normal.
How long will it take to switch from one to the other cable? And the maintenance cost, does it go up because you're going to be maintaining the second cable?
Yeah, it's a good point. There's instantaneous switching available, so it might not even be noticeable to anyone that it even happened. So that's how well it operates. And we've even seen that happen here in Palau back in May 2018. We had a brief outage on BSCC and switched to satellite and then back to BSCC, and no one even noticed because it happened early in the morning and there wasn't much traffic and the satellite was still at 500 in those days and so on. So that switching part's not the issue. I think the second part of your question, though, related to operating costs. And so yes, the principal operating costs associated with cables are usually marine maintenance costs, and they're calculated on a per kilometre basis. That's one of the huge advantages of a branching unit cable. So in our case, we've got, at the moment with PC1, we've got a 207 kilometre cable, not very long, and we pay about $30,000 a year for marine maintenance for that. Coral Sea cable is 1,500 or 1,700 kilometres. Imagine what their O&M is for marine maintenance. So yes, to have two cables does cost double for the O&M. Yes, it does, definitely, because you've got double the length, or in this case we're going to go from 170 to maybe 150 or something, but roughly double our marine maintenance cost. That's all built into the plan. Other operating costs also exist, so we need a network operating centre, and we can't use the same one because it's a different host cable. So we've got to duplicate our network operating centres. All of those costs, yes. We do get a few cost reductions in that we don't need to necessarily pay for the same massive redundancy that we're looking at in Guam at the moment. So we might get a little bit of cost reduction, operating cost reduction there, because by having two, that's far more robust than whatever we could do in Guam on its own. But generally speaking, yeah, two cables double the maintenance cost.
Okay, I think my last question is, does the contracts, they get reviewed by the Attorney General, or they do?
Yeah, the process is that all of the documentation will be reviewed from the perspective of the Republic of Palau, at least. Not, they won't care about our commercials, but from the Republic of Palau perspective, it will be reviewed by Austin Gaylord at the Office of the President, and then by the Attorney General, and then the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance will have to sign certain undertakings about the effectiveness of the contracts, about BSCC's performance, that they will force BSCC to perform in accordance with those sort of guarantees, in addition to the sovereign financial guarantee that we're talking about. So there's effectively three kinds of if you like, guarantees sit here. One is the financial, which would be signed off by the Minister of Finance. And then there's a performance guarantee that will be reviewed by the Attorney General and signed off by the Minister of Finance. And then a legal opinion that will be signed off by the Attorney General.
Okay. And then the sovereign guarantee is a separate document?
Yes. Again, reviewed by Office of the President and Attorney General, and then referred to the Minister of Finance for signature because he's the shareholder.
Oh, he is your owner, Minister of Finance. I forgot that. Okay. Hindi ka niya question? Okay. Senator Senior has one more.
Final question for me. This is the House Joint Resolution number 10-73-16 that we're going to be addressing. It's been sent to us because it's already been passed by the House of Delegates. And I know Chairman Sakuma touched on it a bit, but I wanted to explain for the viewers who may be watching this tonight. On page 2 of the House Joint Resolution, it says, lines 20 to 24. Whereas BSCC and its partners have commissioned independent assessments of the proposed financing package and found that the proposed borrowing would be repayable by BSCC even in the event of a 60% reduction in revenue, which is not projected to occur. This finding gives confidence that the proposed borrowing will be a profitable endeavor with great benefits to the people of the Republic. So in light of all these concerns that's been raised by Chairperson Inabo, can you just break that down and explain that in the event that you see a reduction in your revenue by a 60%?
That refers to some specific modelling. I'll put it up for you. No, that'll turn it off. No, press any other button. You press the on-off button. Oh, did you? Oh. Okay. Look, I'll try and answer it with... Sorry, the technology's got beyond us, but it's pretty straightforward. So there were 2 studies undertaken. The first was commissioned by AIFFP, which is that GHD study, that quite long study that we've been going through in some detail. And that's a study that's undertaken from the perspective of the Republic of Palau. So it's not a BSCC perspective, it's a Palau perspective. The other thing that was done that's really what you're referring to and that's referred to in that joint resolution is the 60% revenue reduction. That was modelled by AIFFP itself, by their economists. So what they're looking at is, okay, here's the BSCC cash flow forecast. How solid is that? Where's the destruction point? Where can we break that model? So they said, obviously it'll be in COVID. A COVID dip will break that model. That's what they assumed. And they put in various levels of COVID dip, modelling 20%, 40%, 60%. I might have a number of them anyway. And all of those showed a debt service cover ratio, which is what bankers love, of better than 1, except the last one. The 60% was the first one that went below debt service cover ratio of 1, which means there'd be some question about your ability to repay. But even then, we only dipped into our reserves for a few $100,000 to match it. So what that statement is really saying is that with a 60% revenue dip from COVID, we can still meet all those obligations. Beyond that, all bets are off. And we'd certainly support that that's pretty good analysis. The GHD analysis is much more speculative, I think. It's economic evaluation, which is always speculative by its nature. It has to make guesses about the future. But that 60% number, that's actually sensitivity modelling at various scenarios of COVID revenue loss against our forecast So it's much more, I guess, tangible, real. And what it shows is at 60% revenue loss, our DSCR drops below 1, and we'd have to dip into our reserves a little bit. Even at 50% revenue reduction, we don't even touch our reserves. So I think that the message there is, given the circumstances, this is pretty much bulletproof.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Russell, Chairman Sakuma, all the board members. Thank you so much for working on this project. I know it's important and you all believe in it. We can see that you are supporting it. We'll discuss this. We have looked at the resolution, and we wanted to make sure all the committee members are comfortable with this decision. That's why we have to have this hearing today. Dila sa question nga say when ngoy ngarang ang girel mla mga itel resolution, how long do we have to, ngoram la mo dia ka sesyon na maulma kuger.
That's, I think that's the question of the day, Chairman. So again, if we look at the timeline, we are scheduled to execute the first contract that's the TPN.
BSCC NEC supply contract, which we had at that point there,
Yeah, at the end of
November.
November. Yeah. So we're up against the pretty tight timeline, and yeah, I understand that there's heading into the holidays and there's no scheduled session, but
I guess realistically, we could sign. I could, in good conscience, recommend to the BSCC board to go ahead and sign the NEC contract if I knew the sovereign guarantee was forthcoming. If it's not, what would I do? I think my recommendation might be different. So I think it literally is now. It's decision time. And we don't have the final NEC contract before us yet, but the version we just sent back to them had minimal changes on it, and they said, thanks very much, we'll finalise. So I think it's coming up next week.
That sounds like we have to have a session on Thanksgiving Day. So, but thank you. We thank you for coming to the hearing today. Otherwise, malotor awar de KB kagir malotor belaw.
o subes ni sa dokora sa daigal dokora technology ngora mo bring le.
Okay, asu mangaria kora final tigingi we mtungi the close la hearing e omal masaula.
That's the thing I was trying to get before. Those two graphs there show the various. Sorry. Those two graphs there show the sensitivity modelling, and I'm happy to send this summary sheet through the chairman to the members of the committee. But this shows the modelling both in terms of cash flow and debt service cover ratio.
Just send an email. Thank you. Okay, kabang kay become close.
Okay, so lang chairman ma kami rogul senators and lesbemel kora take time off for busy schedules so kami during this holiday season me kuk saudaigal kora PC2 gider rogo ako mal madengek mong it's hindi optimal situation but in these times, not much is optimal. We wish we had more time. We wish we had, 100% grant, but it's just not the case. And this is, the best that we could do to seek a solution for a fully redundant network to Palau. So again, we appreciate your taking your time to thoroughly review everything that we've put together. And I think, at the end of the day, our mandate is to provide quality, equitable network service to Palau. However, your mandate is much more important, and that's to provide what's best for Palau. So we really appreciate you taking the time to thoroughly go through everything and make what we hope will be the best decision for the Republic.
You don't have any comments to add, board members? Koman masulang almlay, I know this is a hard decision alang nga COVID-19 makatokora mal dia udutet maul makatokora cautious gimal mle omarang al kula say cell hub el blegid bodata ke to ngeringi ayulum daslo sing holder cell placer gider telgay wala maski that time masel recovery economy gide to kora namu dingel waseng ngari ududet ndia seguiding ya mosabe de lo mesengi como dingel wasegida kabelment gida albangara shortage mang kora american lo sama say kodo mal sergida lo arage pol bola kaudude del continue kabelment operation argid ma igegit ya ngarol do sama ulmagi koram kategal latalgim ada dur tingal issue committee members manle negative do sama gidel mang giyom dasel ulmagi ulger kami ulme wasi bolsep el mo clear ulwasing ngaria time or hindi ka time ulmagi lerer kamam lego ngamaloger wasi tiangirel morir el al time ma kom la olte yigid el financial benefits asum godungure lang ma committee mo meserngi margongin gi mol mamalasem lower nga sa el timeline ng kami amla o ay sergi kom sulang etel hearing ra senet tati mette gite close